National Nancy's, the fourth in the Alex Reynolds Mysteries. Author Fred Hunter, St. Martin's Press, New York, 2000. Narrator Eric Aust. Tony Milano owned a condo in one of the older, more elegant buildings on Lakeshore Drive, just short of Lincoln Park. We took a cab through the park and were at the entrance to its building in a matter of minutes. Although we had a better than nodding acquaintance with Tony, we'd never been to his place before, mainly because we didn't normally travel in the same circles. Something for which I thanked God. And because Tony doesn't do much on a social basis unless he's getting paid for it. A red-coated brass-buttoned doorman directed us to the elevators, and we rode up to the 19th floor in solemn silence in a walnut-paneled car. I leaned over to Peter and whispered, "I feel like I'm in a traveling confessional." He laughed quietly. "It is kind of like a church, isn't it?" The door slid open and we stepped into an abbreviated hallway in which there were only 4 doors. Dignified party sounds emanated from the last one, accompanied by some stereotypical cocktail party piano music. I knocked lightly and the door was opened immediately by a 50-ish man in tails. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said with a bow. "Welcome to the fundraiser." He smoothly extended an arm into the apartment. "Thank you," said Peter as we crossed the threshold. We stopped abruptly. "Wow!" I exclaimed gawkingly. I sounded like Julia Roberts when she first saw the lobby of the Regent Beverly Wilshire. The apartment was like an art museum. Bright white walls, polished hardwood floors, objects d'art on pedestals and in gilded frames. The furniture was minimalist, the largest piece being a plush mint green couch, facing a fireplace of silver marble. There was a white baby grand in one corner. The man playing it was smiling broadly and looked up only when one of the guests spoke to him. As we'd feared, it was powder night at Tony's. The room was awash with rather hungry-looking gentlemen who were so old that if you tapped one of them on the cheek, you would expect dust to fly off of them. It wasn't hard to spot Tony. He was the one dark head standing encircled by a bunch of elderly men. He looked like a very healthy bloom surrounded by dandelions in the fluff stage. Tony Milano was a sleekly handsome man. He had long black hair that he kept swept back off his broad forehead, flawless dark olive skin, and a butt so firm you could chew gum with it. He had bright brown eyes and a square, firmly set jaw. His statuesque features were mitigated somewhat by an endearing, slightly crooked smile that made him look as if he was aware of his beauty and just a little embarrassed by it. Tony had successfully managed to turn his looks into a career. He was a very highly paid, very high-class, very selective escort in the truest sense of the term. From what I'd been told, sex wasn't involved, but beauty was. Men, usually older ones, were willing to put up a great deal of money just to be seen at important functions with Tony on their arms. When he noticed us, he raised one perfectly groomed eyebrow and smiled. He disengaged himself from his admirers. I swear I saw little puffs of white powder poof off of a couple of them, and came across the room to us. "Alex! Peter! How lovely to see you!" he said, shaking our hands in turn. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Thank you," I replied. "Tony, this place is breathtaking." "Oh, the two of you have never been here before?" "No, this is our first time," Peter answered. Tony put a hand to his own chest. "That's purely negligence on my part," he said with such sincere elegance it made my skin crackle. "Where'd you get all these beautiful things?" I asked. He glanced around the room. "The art." "Oh, they were gifts." The off-handed way he referred to the expensive items seemed completely sincere. He wasn't impressed by his own possessions, which to me was a point in his favor. "Gifts?" I gasped. Tony shrugged. "People give me things. I can't stop them. I wouldn't want to. Isn't that beautiful?" He gestured toward a statue near the windows. It was pinkish marble, carved into a sort of twisted oval with a hole in the center and polished to a shine. "Yeah, it's really impressive," said Peter. I couldn't tell whether or not he was being facetious or was just mystified. "My God, what's that?" I exclaimed, noticing the glint from one of Tony's manicured fingers. He drew back his hand, looked down, and smiled. Oh, that's just a ring. I reached out, drew his hand toward me, and examined the ring. It's a diamond-studded pinky ring. Was that a gift to you? Yes, he replied with a tinge of sadness. It was from Eustace. He was a very sweet man. Was? Said Peter. Tony nodded. He died last year. Such a waste. I think the expression is, he was one of the good ones. I'm so sorry, I said. Was it... He looked at me questioningly for a moment, then realized what I meant. Oh, no. It was heart failure. Eustace was 87. I glanced at Peter, who was looking at Tony so incredulously I almost laughed. I cleared my throat. I'm really glad that you're holding this fundraiser. Clark needs all the help he can get. Yes, it's nice to have a right-thinking candidate for once. So it's a pleasure to do it. And I figure I should do what I can since I have the resources. He extended his palm toward the coterie of old men. Ah, Tony, I said relatively. Those guys are all your clients? Most of them. Isn't it dangerous to have them all here at once? Together, I mean. Aren't you afraid they'll be jealous of each other? No. Why should they be? I glanced at Peter again. Well, they all date you, don't they? He shrugged. They all pay me to escort them places. They know it's a business. Besides, they're all ardent supporters of Charles Clark and more than willing to donate to the cause. I think they were just waiting for a suitable occasion. I couldn't help smiling, meaning they're all willing to give to the campaign just for the opportunity of being around you. He laughed. We all have to do our little bit. He cast an affectionate gaze at his clients. Doesn't it bother you that the candidate himself isn't going to make an appearance? Peter asked. Not at all, Tony replied. It's enough that he supports gay rights. I'm a realist. He'd be taking a great risk in attending a party like this. I need him in office more than I need him here. He glanced over my shoulder and waved at someone just coming through the door. Could you excuse me? More guests are arriving. Be sure to get something to drink. The bar is just over there. He had started to move away from us, but I laid a hand on his arm and said, just a sec. Can I ask you something? He lowered his head a fraction, and his face became a mask of concentration. Even when he was in a hurry, he managed to look as if he was intensely interested in what I was about to say. It didn't surprise me that he was so successful. You get around a lot. We've been hearing lately that there's some really juicy dirt on Fritz Peterson. Have you heard anything about it? I wouldn't wonder, he said with a shake of his head. Everyone has a skeleton, don't they? Peter and I watched him as he walked away and greeted the newcomers. 3 men so old I was surprised they were able to stand up without assistance. From the look of his clients, I said, some of us have more skeletons than others. We made our way to the bar and requested a pair of rum and cokes. Gladly, gentlemen, said the bartender as he slopped the liquor into the glasses. It's nice to see you. Peter and I glanced at each other. Do we know you? I asked. He leaned toward us. No. It's just nice to see anyone else under 100 at this party. He gave us a stage wink and we laughed. Well, did you find your tape? A voice demanded from behind us. I was glad I hadn't been taking a drink at the time because this was hardly the place for a spit take. Peter and I wheeled around simultaneously and found John Stillman standing there with an angry smirk on his face. How'd you know about that? I asked. John Schuler told me, of course. I told you you could have come to me. I told you didn't have to go bothering John. Not that you're one to say I told you so, Peter muttered loud enough for Sean to hear him. Sean glared at him, and for a split second I thought he might cause a scene, but he controlled himself by spouting 3 little huffs in rapid succession. Look, Sean, I said, we weren't trying to get over your head. This was just something that, well, we thought if it was true, that Schuler wouldn't have wanted anyone to know about. Yeah, sure. He folded his arm over his chest. We were under the impression that the campaign was secretly trying to find out something on Peterson. I replied, trying not to sound as sarcastic as I was beginning to feel. Secretly, that would imply that it wasn't supposed to be common knowledge. I was treading on thin ice here, because if anyone thought to trace the rumor, they might find that it had originated with me. What the hell do you care anyway? If they're trying to get something on Peterson, who cares? All the candidates do that. We wouldn't be working for one that did, said Peter. Oh, come on. Nobody's that honest. There was a beat before Peter said, Our candidate is supposed to be that honest. Remember? Sean was stumped by this, and he clearly didn't like the feeling. He looked as if he would have liked to argue the point, but arguing against the honesty of his own candidate wouldn't be very wise. You still should have told me about it first. At least then I would have been prepared. For what? I asked. For when John called me into his office and asked me if I knew about this tape. How in the hell should I know anything? Jody didn't talk to men. It made me look like an idiot. I'm supposed to be running the office. It made me look like I don't know what's going on right under my nose. I didn't think it advisable to point out that in all probability he didn't know what was going on right under his nose. Sean, we really weren't trying to bypass you. We honestly didn't think Schuler would want us to discuss the tape business with anyone else. I'm sorry we hurt your feelings. He pursed his lips for a few seconds and seemed to deflate a little. It's all right. I was overacting. I'm sorry about how I was at the office and here. The pressure's getting to me. There's just a... This is a job. It's a lot more than I bargained for, you know? He sounded sincere, but he kept looking at us as if he wanted to make sure we were buying it. It doesn't surprise me, I said. Things are picking up fast with the primary so near. He bridled. Apparently he didn't want anyone to agree with him. Well, I think I can handle it. I'm sure you can, I replied. We fell silent, and I finally got to take a swig of my rum and Coke. It had gotten a bit diluted from the melting ice, but it was still so rum-heavy that if I'd been there on my own, I would have thought the bartender was trying to get me drunk. Sean shifted from one foot to the other. Now that he'd spoken his piece, there wasn't anything else for him to say, and he didn't know how to gracefully excuse himself. After a few minutes of this, he suddenly heaved a sigh and said, Well, I suppose I should mingle. Try to sell everyone on Clark. Get those donations. I don't think you'll have to sell them on Clark, Peter said. They're sold on Tony. They'll give. He creased his forehead, not knowing exactly how to take this, as he walked away from us. My, I said. Sean has certainly gotten into the inner sanctum very quickly. What do you mean? Schuler called him in and told him all about our conversation. He asked him about it, honey. He was just trying to find out if Sean had heard anything. He's the office manager, after all. I don't think there's anything sinister about that. I called my lip at him. You know sometimes you're just no fun. The number of guests had doubled in the time we'd spent talking to Sean, and the noise level increased accordingly. Hors d'oeuvres were being propelled through the room on silver platters by a handful of gorgeous young men in black vests, black slacks, and white shirts. I assumed the waiters and their edibles were meant to whet all kinds of appetites. Look at that guy, I said, as a shortish one with a perfect inverted heart-shaped ass glided away from us. Tony must be planning on getting some serious money tonight. I don't even want to know how you mean that, Peter replied, although John Schuler needn't have worried about what the turnout for this event would be. His repeated, though unenthusiastic announcement had brought out many of the volunteers. Then again, the prospect of free food and drink was probably enticing enough. As the pace of their party picked up, I began noticing some of our fellow office workers milling amongst the elderly. It was beginning to look like visiting day at a very upscale nursing home. Mickey Downs was there, flitting from guest to guest like a busy little bee, who was finding that each of the flowers on which he landed had died. He was dressed in pants so tight that he was running the risk of castration, and an equally tight-knit shirt that showed off his taut torso. I watched him for a while, then noticed Joe Gardner sitting on the ledge of one of the windows overlooking the lake. He was alone and staring dejectedly into the crowd. Peter and I decided to join him. What are you doing all by yourself? I asked cheerfully. Sitting, he said unceremoniously. I'm not any good at this stuff. What stuff? Said Peter. He flapped his hand at the crowd. This kind of party. I could feel myself going red in the face again, and I fought hard to control it. I don't know how one person could so consistently sound like he hated his own people, but Joe certainly managed it. Look at all these guys, he continued. There's no reason for me to be here at all. Then why did you come? I asked, trying to moderate my voice so that it sounded like a question rather than a challenge. He looked up at me with his eyebrows closely knit. Because Schuler asked me to. He did. He asked us all to. You heard him. Oh, that, yeah. But look at all these guys. There was no reason to come. This kind of thing is never fun, except for somebody like Mickey. We all looked into the crowd, and there was Mickey chatting animatedly with a man who looked a little too much like Max Shrek and Nesferatu. By the way, did you ever find out about that tape? Joe asked out of the blue. What? I exclaimed. The tape, the one you were talking about the other day. You ever find out what it was? I glanced at Peter. Oh, no. That was just a rumor I heard. It didn't sound convincing even to me. Why do you ask? He gave me a bored shrug. I just wondered. It's always nice to know I'm working for the right candidate. Yeah, I said slowly. I didn't know what the hell to make of that. Gentlemen and gentlemen, Tony Milano announced, clapping his hands together several times as he climbed onto the rise at the foot of the fireplace. Thank you all very much for coming. We all know why we're here. I can't say anything about Charles Clark that hasn't already been said, but I'm sure you all know how important it is that we get him elected. He reached down and picked up an enormous, ornate glass bowl. For this evening, we'll be referring to this Friedrichstein original, a gift from my dear Walter, as the donation bowl. I expect each and every one of you to contribute. Nothing would please me more than to see your names on some healthy checks made out to Charles Clark. Campaign fund. There was an expected murmur among the old men. The wording Tony had used wasn't lost on them. Apparently, pleasing him was something for which to strive. When he bent down to replace the bowl, every wrinkled neck craned like a sea of aging turkeys. Now, he said as he righted himself, I'd like to provide you with some entertainment. Tonight we have a lovely young singer with whom many of you are already familiar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Miss Phnom Penh. There was enthusiastic applause as the singer appeared in the archway that led to the hall. She had a long braid of jet black hair coiled into a bun atop her head, and wore a long white satin dress slit on both sides all the way to her hips, giving teasing peeks at her shapely legs. Her long black fingernails clutched a tiny white fan which she used to hide the lower half of her face. Oh, Christ, just what we need, a drag queen, said Joe a little too loudly. A couple of the old gentlemen nearby looked down at him, literally, but nobody else seemed to have heard him. Really, I said in disbelief, if this was a drag queen, it was an awful convincing one. Of course it is. Phnom Penh got to the piano in a series of very quick baby steps, bowed to the pianist, who bowed back, and then closed her fan and faced the audience. The pianist played a brief intro, at the end of which the singer opened her mouth and began croaking, "Levy and Rose," in a raspy baritone. I wonder if she knows that Phnom Penh is in Cambodia, I whispered to Peter. I wonder if she knows that geishas aren't, he replied with a sideways nod. We moved away from Joe and over to the pink marble statue. Geez, I see what you mean about him. Who? Joe Gardner. I've seen internalized homophobia before, but he really seems to hate all things gay, doesn't he? I nodded, especially guys that aren't particularly masculine. Did you catch the tone in his voice when he talked about the drag queen and Mickey? He folded his arm and puckered his lips. So what are you saying? What am I saying? What are you saying? He rolled his eyes. Are we saying that we think Joe might be the mole? I thought for a minute, then released a disgusted sigh. You know, I really hate it when you're right. Right about what? This is just impossible, speculating like this. Keep your voice down, Peter said softly. Sorry, but you were right. We're never going to figure out who the bomber is this way. It's like you said, Joe could be acting obnoxious because of internalized homophobia, or anything from self-loathing to bad digestion. Or it could be just plain obnoxious, and hell, half of the people we know hate drag queens. None of it means anything. There was a slight pause, then Peter said, he did mention the tape, because I asked him about it before. That doesn't prove anything either, except that he was interested in whether or not I found anything about it. We both looked over to Joe, who was still sitting on the window seat and staring at the singer with barely masked contempt. Look, I said, He's the only one of the volunteers from the old office that looks at all suspicious to me, at least sexually. So do you want to tell Henry and Raymond about him? He sounded disapproving. I thought for a moment, then smiled. No, I think we should perform a test. Peter raised his right eyebrow. I don't like the sound of that. Don't be silly, I said. Come with me. I headed straight for Tony, who was standing beside the fireplace, gently shaking the hand of a stooped gentleman who had just placed a check in the bowl. Thank you, Jonathan, so very much. Tony, can we talk to you for a minute? I said. Excuse me, Jonathan, he said, releasing the withered hand. He then came over to us. Certainly. What can I do for you? This is going to sound really strange, but I glanced at Peter, who stared back at me, defiantly making it clear he wasn't going to help. Yes, said Tony. You see that guy over there sitting by the window? Tony carefully looked over my shoulder. The one with the curly hair. He looks like he's been sucking lemons. Who is he? His name's Joe Gardner. He's one of the volunteers at campaign headquarters. Yes, Tony said again when I didn't go on immediately. Well, Peter and I have been trying to figure out if he's gay. I mean, not everybody at the office is, of course. I suppose most of them are, but not everyone. Tony didn't take his eyes off me. Yes. I looked at Peter again. He looked away. So, well, we've made a little bet. Peter says he's gay, and I say he's not. Tony raised an eyebrow until it formed a point at the center. Why on earth do you care? We just do, I sputtered. Alex, tell him the truth, Peter said with a sigh. Huh? I was dumbfounded. Peter knew that we were never supposed to tell anyone about our working for the government. He turned to Tony. Alex has an overactive imagination. I do not. Yes, you do. He eyed me as if we were trying to convey something that I wasn't getting, then turned back to Tony. He's been worried ever since the bombing. I can understand that, said Tony. Anyway, he thinks that Joe has been acting suspiciously. Joe says that he's gay, but he also says all these anti-gay things. So Alex thinks he's some sort of, he made a show of not wanting to say the word. A spy, Tony offered, thoroughly amused. Peter flashed his most indulgent smile and made a quick eye movement in my direction. He's just not going to sleep until he gets proof that Joe is what he says he is. I would have found this offensive if I hadn't been so busy trying to keep my mouth from dropping open. But I don't know how anyone could find out if he is what he says he is, Peter concluded. Tony had been looking intently at Joe. A smile spread across his face. And you want me to find out? I couldn't ask you to do something like that. It would put Alex's mind at ease, though. In an effort to include myself in this, I said, the one thing we know at least from what he said is that he doesn't like sissies, and you're the most masculine man we know. Tony moved his lips to one side. There's no need for flattery, Alex. He looked at Peter. So, he says he's gay, and you think he's straight, and you want me to find out if it's true? This sounds like fun. I love a challenge. He glided away from us and went to Joe, who looked up with interest as Tony introduced himself, then sat beside him. I turned to Peter. I see you in a lime green fedora with a little yellow feather sticking out of the band. Shut up. It was your idea. Phnom Penh finished her song with a flourish and gave humble bow in response to the applause. She then went into a stirring rendition of Our Love Is Here to Stay. Well, look who's here. I almost gave myself whiplash when I spun around at the sound of the all-too-familiar voice. Some of my drink sloshed out of the glass and dappled my shoe. Mother! I exclaimed. What are you doing here? It's a fundraiser, she said. I have funds. Simon was standing beside her. He appeared to be having difficulty taking in the surroundings, or at least the people in them. Perhaps he was just worried. With his stately good looks, he probably didn't feel quite safe in the middle of a flock of faggots. There's a great turnout, isn't there? Mother continued. Bigger than we were expecting, I intoned. She turned to her date. Simon, would you mind getting me a drink? The bar's right over there. He glanced at it uncertainly, then said, Of course. Martini? Why not? She said grandly. He went to the bar. $10 as he orders it shaken, not stirred, I said to Peter. I then turned to Mother. Now, what are you really doing here? I've had an idea. Oh, Christ, I said, rolling my eyes. I told you that it's time for me to take things in hand, and I try to keep you from getting killed. If there's a tape involved, we'd better find it, assuming it really does exist. I thought you thought it was dangerous to do that, I said. I think it's dangerous for you to do it, not for me. What? She gently laid a palm against my cheek. Darling, I love you with all my heart, but you're not a very good liar. I think I'm much more suited to this sort of thing. I can go around saying I've heard a rumor about a tape without arousing suspicion. It's the accent, you know. People go all credulous over it. But we've already done that, Peter said, or at least he has. Mother's expression grew sober. Yes, well, I'm not quite so interested in actually finding the tape as I am in creating the impression that someone other than Alex knows about it. But you're my mother, I said, always ready to point out the obvious. That's just the thing. If you were the only one talking about the tape, then you might look unduly curious to whoever's involved. But if I'm talking about it, well, there you have it. I never do when you say that. Peter laughed. I think she means that nobody would believe your mother was sleuthing. They'll be more likely to think the tape is common knowledge. Exactly, she exclaimed. What about Simon? I asked. Oh, he doesn't know anything about the tape, she replied with a wave of her hand. No, I mean you're going to go do all this with Simon in tow? Well, of course, she said, surprised that I would ask such a thing. He won't suspect a thing. He'll just think I'm gossiping. Oh, hey, wait a minute. How do you know he doesn't know anything about the tape? I tried it on him first, she said proudly. He hadn't heard a thing about it. Seemed quite surprised. He hadn't heard about what? Simon appeared at Mother's side and preferred her drink. Oh, about that nasty videotape there's supposed to be of that Fritz Peterson person? She said as she took the glass from him. Simon laughed. Oh, yes, you Americans get more and more in a dither about sex scandals than we do. Really, I said. Who said anything about a sex scandal? We don't know what's on the tape. He faltered in the act of taking a sip of his drink, and his face reddened. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was just assuming. What with talk of a video and all. It could be a payoff of something like that. Or a drug deal, said Peter. Of course, Clark isn't running for mayor of D.C. Of course it could. Where is my mind? Simon said self-effacingly. He had recovered his poise and took a drink. You know, I really admire your Mr. Clark. Why's that? Peter asked. He must be very brave. I read in your papers about his office being blown up, and of course, Jean has told me some about it. It seems he has people who are quite serious about keeping him out of office. If I were him, I don't think I'd be brave enough to stay in the race. I think I would drop out. Surely, if these people were bold enough to blow up the office, they won't be stopped. They'll most likely try again. Really? Said Peter. I would drop out, Simon continued. After all, what's more important, your life or being a bleeding senator? Peter folded his arms across his chest, a sure sign that he was unhappy with what he was hearing. Some people believe that serving in public office is important and worth the risk. Simon shrugged. There's always someone else to do it, isn't there? It might not be someone who feels the same way you do, or would vote the way you would. Well, it all comes out in the wash, doesn't it? Not necessarily. There are some people who will risk their lives for what they believe in. Fancy that, said Simon. He took another sip of his drink, then cleared his throat. You know, there's something I've been meaning to say to you. I don't like the idea of the two of you working in a place that someone is willing to bomb. I don't think you should work there. He sounded so imperious that neither Peter nor I spoke for a few seconds. There was something in Simon's tone that implied we should accept his suggestion without question. Oh, you don't? Was the best I could manage. Alex and I happen to be two of those people who think that what we're doing is important. Simon smacked his lips. For the first time in our acquaintance, he looked displeased. I was merely expressing concern, he said smoothly. If for no other reason than I know how important you are to your mother. There now, isn't that nice? Mother said in a tone that gave me the weird feeling she was mocking everyone at once, which is entirely within her capabilities. Simon completed his thought without noticing Mother or taking his eyes off me. Take it for what it's worth. Oh, my boys don't need any protecting, Mother said with a sidelong glance at me. Usually. Simon shrugged again and downed the remainder of his drink. Oh, look, Mother exclaimed. There's Dickie Stevenson. I wonder what he's doing in town. Simon, I have to introduce you to Dickie. He's an old friend of mine. She led him away. Did that sound like a threat to you? I said. Which part? Peter replied. That business about how Clark should drop out of the race. That sounded like a veiled warning. Why tell us? I looked at Simon's retreating back. Maybe he's onto us. How? Mother asked him about the tape. Maybe he figured it out. Or maybe he's always known. What? Peter said incredulously. Say he's the bomber. It's beyond the realm of coincidence to me that he would choose Mother as an avenue to infiltrate Clark's headquarters by accident. I mean, without knowing that we worked for the government. Peter sighed. Sweetheart, you're going off the deep end again. If all he wanted to do was blow up the office, then why go through this elaborate ruse of striking up a relationship with Jean at all? Why not just break into the place and plant the bomb? It's not like anybody would ever know. I don't know. Why in the hell does the FBI think someone might have infiltrated the office? They were just being thorough, Alex. I don't think either of them seriously believe one of the office workers is involved. Yeah, I know, I said with frustration. Henry said they were just covering all the bases. It doesn't make any sense. Well, there's one thing I'll give you about Simon, Peter said. I don't like the way he said we shouldn't be working there. He made it sound like he expected us to quit on the spot. I shook my head slowly. I think we're going to have to find out about him. Alex, you can't turn your mother's boyfriend over to the FBI. I know. Especially since he stopped abruptly, not wanting to go on. You might as well say it. At least he looked apologetic. All right, especially since I have a feeling you're suspicious of Simon for reasons that have nothing to do with the bombing. I sucked in my lips. You're right, I said with a disgusted sigh. We were interrupted at that point with Mickey fluttered up to us. Isn't this a wonderful party? He gushed. You're enjoying yourself, I said with a smile. I couldn't help it. Mickey's enthusiasm could be infectious. I realized most of the guys here were personally involved in building the Sphinx, but I don't think I've ever been in such demand before. His mouth suddenly dropped open. Oh my God, look at that! We followed his gaze and were just as astonished as he was by what we saw. Tony Milano and Joe Gardner were still seated by the window, but were now engaged in a very deep kiss. Now that's interesting, Mickey said nasally. I have to go tell Richard about this. He'll just die. He whisked away into the crowd. I was about to say, well, that answers that, when I saw something very unnerving. Joe's eye popped out just a slit and looked in our direction. Then he gently pushed Tony away, got up, and made his way through the throng of guests about out the door. Tony was staring after him, his expression totally perplexed. He rose slowly and came over to us. That is one very peculiar young man, he said. What happened? I can't say I know. We were sitting there exchanging pleasantries, if you can call his insistence on discussing politics pleasant, when he suddenly took me by the collar, pulled me to him, and gave me the most probing kiss I've had in weeks. I've had prostate exams that were less intrusive. You didn't do anything to... Let my voice trail off suggestively. Good heavens, no. I couldn't have been more surprised. He shook his head. Very odd. But gay, I asked. Tony drew his lips to one side as he had earlier. If not, he's willing to go much further to keep up a front than most people I know. But still, he does carry that angry young man thing to the extreme. The young people are far too intense. And that's what I like about my clients. They're all so laid back. They're practically laid out, I said. I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, Tony, I said sincerely. I'm just more confused than ever. I didn't mean for that to happen. It's quite all right, he replied with a professional aplomb. It may be hard to believe, but this sort of thing has happened to me before. I smiled. I don't find that hard to believe. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll go brush my tongue. Once Tony was out of earshot, I said to Peter, Did you notice anything strange when the two of them kissed? You mean that Joe looked over here? Yeah, like he wanted to make sure we were watching? We didn't stay much longer after that, when Phnom Penh launched into her medley from the flower drum song, something that the crowd seemed to have been anxiously anticipating. I felt it was time to go. We tracked Mother down to a small circle of geezers who were hanging on her every word and pulled her aside just long enough to tell her we were leaving and ask if she wanted to go with us. She declined and went back to her admirers. We didn't mean to snub Simon, but neither of us remembered him until we started to walk away and I found myself caught by the elbow. Alex? Peter? You're leaving? Said Simon. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we are. I I just wanted to say that I'm sorry if I sounded full of myself earlier. I mean, when I said I was worried about you working in that office, I really was only worried. Yes, I said, staring at him quizzically. Thank you. I appreciate that, but we'll be all right. He flashed that broad, ingratiating smile of his. I'm sure you will. Without another word, he went back to Mother. We said goodbye to Tony, then left while the party carried on. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.